Welcome to our third and last session of this tutorial. We will discuss two different scenarios in this tutorial or in this session. The first one, store the file provided score.txt somewhere other than Python's main directory. So we will avoid storing this file in Python's main directory, and if you are asking what is it, this file, I'm going to provide it along with other files so that you can use it. It's just a file that includes or has a number of scores, floating point scores, and these floating point scores of course are stored as strings in this text file. So in your computer, store it anywhere. I stored it in some directory, so you are free to store it anywhere. Next to that, you need to write a Python code that reads these scores available in the given file and then calculate and display their average. So we need to calculate and display the average. The average can be applied in different ways. I mean, for this case, or in this case, just for the simplicity, we will just calculate the average in a simple way. Let's just go ahead and open our Python. Right. And let's create a new file. And here, let me just write a simple comment. This program opens file from specified directory or specified location better, I don't have to say directory in this case, location, and processes the given data to calculate the average. Score. Let's create main as we always do. So this is the main function, and we need to do three things. First one is opening the file. We need to get an object file first to open this file, and this is an in file. So as we got used to do, we have these two arguments for the open function. The first one, we have to specify the directory where we stored our file. This is the directory where I store the location. It's on D, the hard disk D, and in a folder called Python codes. Now I have to specify the name, and the name is given to us actually scores.txt. So we need to store it somewhere. You don't have to store with under the same name. You can randomly store it anywhere in your computer. Now this string is not adequate. We need to specify that this is, or we need to make sure that this is a plain or a raw string. Why? Now R here means a raw string because backslash with some combination is considered as an escape sequence. So backslash n is a new line, backslash t is a tab, and etc. For this reason, we don't want to get stuck with that consideration. So we tell the program this is a raw string, so disregard any backslash in there. And we are opening this file for reading. Okay, then next to that, I need to create an accumulative sum for summing up all the scores, and I need to initialize a counter for counting the number of scores so that I can divide on the total number of scores in order for me to get the average. Initialize them to zeros, and as you see here, we have this is floating point. So I specify that this is a floating point because I'll sum a floating point scores, and here we have just a count of integer numbers. All right. Next to that, since this file is already open, we need to calculate the summation. So in order for us to do that, we can use a loop. Here, let's say score for score in file in this object for all scores within the in file. what will we do? We need to sum them up. So score plus equal. All right, so now I have a score. However, it's not a floating point. This score is not a floating point, it's a string. So I will do this. Float. I'm going to convert with this float function the score that I just got from the file after stripping the right \n, or the right escape sequence in this case. Right, next to that, I will increment the counter by 1 with each iteration. That's good enough for this loop. We don't have anything else to do. Next, we will close the file in file, because we are done processing it, in file.close. And then we will just write a simple display statement to calculate and display at the same time the average print. Okay, the average score is, and let me use format function this time so that I can manipulate the output or the display. Now we have two arguments. The first one is the average. So the average is the total sum divided by the count. This is the way we calculate the average. And then I will insert a string here to specify how many digits I need for precision. So I'm going to say enough for me 2 digits as a floating point, as a mantissa here. Then I will exit the main and call it. Let's save and run. Okay, here let's give it a name. This is the 6th example for this chapter. Okay, the average score is, somewhere. It depends on the values there. You may change these values. I just set random scores and I got the outcome like this. Okay, let's go to the next question. Include in question 1 an exception handler, or exception handling procedure, actually, exception handling. Exception handling, let me change it, exception handling procedure. To handle the exception if the file doesn't exist, or if also an invalid score is available in the file. So we may have different types of exceptions, as I explained in the theoretical part. We have 2 types here, and we will discuss them or include them together in the question. Let's not open a new file. I'll just use this one so that we save some time. All right, so I will create the try suite and include all the scope within it. This is a bit tricky. Please pay attention to the indentation, because it must be consensus. We must have a consensus with the indentation here. So all these statements may raise an exception, and due to that we need to write an except here, except block for handling the exception. And here we are asking for 2 main conditions or 2 main cases. The first one, if the file doesn't exist, and the second one, if an invalid score is entered. Let me go back to the file. So the first one, file not found error. You may ask me, how do you memorize it? Well, with practice. Such exceptions, you can only memorize them or remember them by practicing. And within this exception, I can just print some statement, print here. The file does not exist. You could write anything comes to your mind, just tells the user that there is a problem with the file that doesn't exist. Okay, the second exception we need to consider, exit the block of the first exception. except here is telling us consider invalid score. So invalid score, we can use value error, and it's also an exception, and I can print a message informing the user that we have a problem with some score. Invalid score. Well, my program has no problem because I'm sure that the file exists and there is no problem with the scores. Let's try to change the file name. Okay, I'm just removing this S from the file, and I know that this file doesn't exist because I just placed only this scores file in this folder so that we test together. Let's just try to save and run. Okay, the file doesn't exist. That means this is an exception. Now let me explain. The first thing happens is this is exactly the execution of this line. The program tries to open this file, however the file doesn't exist. So what happens? The execution stops here and it jumps to accept block. So we skip whatever available in the try suite and we go to accept, and we process this as the file doesn't exist. So it enters the block of accept and it displays the statement. We may write other statements. It's possible. You may write other messages or maybe other consideration that you have if the file doesn't exist. All right, let's consider something else. Let me consider this one again, fix it. Let me go to the file itself. Let me open it. And let me change something here. I place an invalid numerically invalid score and save it. Right. Let's try to apply now. Okay, the file is fine, its name is just fine, but we have an invalid score, so we cannot calculate the average. Let's run. See what happens. Invalid score. So let's just go back and check what happens. Okay, this one will just run. Everything here will just execute until we reach to this loop. All iterations will run until the last iteration. The last iteration we have in the last score, we have something that cannot be converted to float. And due to that, an exception will be erased. And everything here will be skipped next to this step. And we will jump to the accept block and we will process whatever in it. So nothing will be considered next to this one. The file will not close, the print statement will not be executed. Let's change something here. I may have accept value error and then I may get a default message from the system, let's say as error. So I would like to print a default message, not a message that I'm writing. Let's say I'm not quite sure what could be the error and I would like a good reminder to the user. Let me display this error. Okay, so again, the problem here is exactly a problem with the score, invalid score. So I would like to check what kind of an error message will come to me from the system. Couldn't convert string to a float. This is extremely clear. We have a string. I wrote 0 in words instead of just 0 as a number and cannot be converted to float. So this is what the message is telling us. All right, I can do the same to this, you can say exception. I can provide an error also here, or it could be any other valid name. It could be error or ER. It's just, you can say, a variable that will display for you the default message. Let's change this again to score without S and run. Now look at the message. Well, error number 2, no such file or directory, so we couldn't locate your file. That means we cannot find this one, or maybe the directory is wrong, or you provided some mistake in the location, or you mistakenly provided the location of your file. All right. Now you may ask me, but we have two exceptions. Why only this one is raised, not the other one? Well, this is the first to catch. So there is an exception. The first exception met in the code or raised in the code will be just processed and it will be handled. We will not go to any other statements next to that. So all these statements will not be processed because we will just jump directly to the exception handler here, the block of except. I hope you will benefit from this short tutorial and have a good time. Goodbye.